Okay, before I start my presentation, I want to have some words why we actually wrote this paper when the Canon Automation had this call for papers for the iCC 2020. And the background is actually over several years now, we have customers who build up systems which are highly scalable, like battery clusters or heating systems and so on. And they decided to use CANopen because it's very mature and reliable. The only problem they had is, where do I get the node IDs for my devices? And so when this call for papers came, we just wrote down our ideas how you could achieve something like the same functionality like in J9049, where the nodes itself claim their addresses. And yeah, that's the background of that. So my agenda for the next 40 minutes, or about 40 minutes, is what is actually CANopen node ID. I mean, if you're already working with CANopen, then you know that, but maybe some from the automotive area don't even know what a node ID is. And how is a node ID actually assigned? Then I will talk a little bit about the reason for this approach and how does it work, and show you a little example of a proof of concept. A CANopen node ID is actually the address of a CANopen device in the network. It has to be unique in the network, and it is a 7-bit value, which actually means that the node ID can only go up to the number 127, and it actually starts at number 1, so 0 is forbidden. So you can only have 127 devices in one network. It should be unique, and unique is the reason because many of the services in CANopen using this node ID to create the CAN identifier for the communication. For example, the error control mechanism uses the CAN ID hex 700 plus the node ID of the device who's sending the heartbeat, for example. And that's why it has to be unique. And the CANopen node ID actually enables you to switch from the initialization state in CANopen to the communication state. And the problem here is if the device doesn't have a node ID, it would get actually stuck in a substate reset communication. If you're familiar with CANopen, you know what I'm talking about. And you're not able to communicate at all via CANopen. So without a node ID, you're not able to communicate with the outside world. And the reason is that in this substate, there is actually a check defined. So if your node ID is in a range from 1 to 127, then you're able to leave this reset communication state and enter the pre-operational state, which is the default first communicating state of a CANopen device. Now, the question is, how get a device its own node ID? The simple approach is actually just code it hard in software. That's very easy, but the problem here is, of course, if you have multiple of the same devices in a network, then they would all have the same node ID if they're running the same software, which is not the desired behavior. Another possibility would be to have some kind of hardware configurations. And what I'm thinking of when I say hardware configuration, it could be a dip switch or Terry switch or some coded plugs or something like that. You could also create your own configuration process. For example, download some configuration file to the device or have some proprietary possibilities to get access to the device and create or save a node ID.